Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we are going to see how to do subnetting for Class C IP network. This will cover the below list of items: how to find the total number of subnets, how to find the total number of IP addresses per every subnet, how to find total number of host IP addresses in every subnet, how to find network ID and broadcast ID for every subnet, and how to find the first host IP and last host IP address for every subnet. In Class C IP network, the IP address will range from 192 to 223 in first octet, and the default subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. The default CADR value is 24/24. The CADR value is the total number of network bits. In Class C IP network, 24 bits are reserved as network bits, and the remaining 8 bits are reserved as host bits. Before going to example, we will see this subnet reference table. I have used this table to convert binaries of subnet mask into decimals using the 2-power table. The first example, I am going to use this network 192.168.15.0. This is Class C IP network. The CADR value I have used for this example is 26, but for Class C IP network, the default CADR value is 24. That is 24 numbers of network bits. But for our example, we need 26 bits. So we need to borrow 2 bits from the network host bits. So now we will borrow those 2 bits. I borrowed. Now the revised subnet mask value will change into 255.255.192. Now the total number of subnet bits are 2 and the total number of host bits are 6. Next, we are going to find out total number of subnets. The formula is 2 power n, where n is equal to total number of subnet bits. In our case, it is 2. So 2 power 2. The value is 4. So here we can create 4 numbers of subnets using this network. Next, we are going to find out total number of IP addresses per subnet. The formula is 2 power h, where h is equal to total number of host bits. In our case, it is 6. So 2 power 6. The value is 64. Next, we are going to find out total number of hosts per subnet. The formula is 2 power h minus 2. So 2 power 6 minus 2. The value is 62. Next, we are going to find out block size. The formula is 256 minus non-zero octet value in subnet mask. We have to find the non-zero octet value. We have to read this value from right side to left side. So we have to start from here. The first value itself 192. So we have to deduct 192 from 256. We will get 64. Our block size is 64. Now we are going to find out network ID and broadcast ID for every subnet. Network ID is the first IP address of every subnet. So for first subnet, the network ID is 192.168.15.0. And for the subsequent network ID, to get the subsequent network ID, we have to add the block size. Block size is 64. This block size we should add in the non-zero octet from the right side. So we should see in the subnet mask. This is our first non-zero octet. That is the 4th octet. So we should add this block size 64 in the 4th octet. We will get this value 192.168.15.64. The same way we have to add this block size 64 in the 4th octet. So we will get these values as network ID for remaining subnets. Next, we are going to find out broadcast ID for every subnet. The broadcast ID is the last IP address of every subnet. So to get the broadcast ID, we have to deduct one IP address from the Next network ID. So our next network ID is 15.64. When we deduct, that's the previous IP address. When we deduct one IP address from this, we will get 192.168.15.63. So from network ID to broadcast ID, we are having total 64 IP addresses. So when we add this 0 to 63, we will get the 64 number of IP addresses. So to get the next broadcast ID, the same way we have to deduct one IP address from the next network ID. So we will get 127. The same way we do so, we will get the remaining broadcast IDs. Next, we are going to find out the usable IP ranges. These usable IP addresses normally lies in between this network ID and broadcast ID. So our first host IP is the next IP address of network ID. So to get the first host IP address, we have to add one IP address to our network ID. So we will get 192.168.15.1. The same way when we add one IP address to the next IP address, that is 15.64. So we will get 15.65. The same way when we add one IP address, that is the next IP address of network ID, we will get the first host IP address for every subnet. So we are going to find out the last host IP address. The last host IP address is the previous IP address of broadcast ID. So broadcast ID is 192.168.15.63. So the previous IP address is 15.62. We have to deduct one IP address from our broadcast ID. The same way when we deduct for next broadcast ID, we will get 15.126. The same way we have to do it for the remaining last host IP addresses. We are going to see one more example here. The network number is 192.168.30.0. This is the Class C IP network. The CADR value we are going to use for this example is 29. That is the total number of network bits. But for Class C network, the default CADR value is 24 numbers of network bits. But for our example, we need 29. We are in shortage of 5 network bits. That 5 bits, we should borrow it from the host bits. I already borrowed and highlighted that. So the revised subnet mask value changed here. Here you can see in the fourth octet, the value changed from 0 to 248. So the number of subnet bits are 5 and the remaining host bits are 3. Now we are going to find out total number of subnets. The formula is 2 power n. Here n is equal to number of subnet bits. In our case, it is 5. So 2 power 5 is equal to 32. So we can create 32 number of subnets from this network. Next, we are going to find out total number of IP addresses per every subnet. The formula is 2 power h. In our case, h is equal to 3. Total number of host bits are 3. So 2 power 3 is equal to 8. Next, we are going to find out total number of hosts per subnet. The formula is 2 power h minus 2. So in our case, it is 2 power 3 minus 2. It is 6. Next, we are going to find out the block size. The formula is 256 minus non-zero octet value in the subnet mask. So non-zero octet value, we have to read from the right to left. If you read from the right side, the 248 is a non-zero octet value. So we have to deduct this 248 from 256, we will get 8. This is our block size. Next, we are going to find out network ID and broadcast ID for every subnet. The total number of subnets are 32. In the table, I already written all the subnets, 32 numbers. Now, we have to find the network ID. Network ID is the first IP address of every subnet. For the first subnet, the network ID is our network number 192.168. the 30.0. Now we have to find the broadcast ID. Broadcast ID is the last IP address. Last IP address of every subnet. For in our case, we are having 8 numbers of total number of IP addresses are 8. So we have to add 8 addresses. So we will get 30.7. Then we have to find the usable IP address ranges. It will normally lies in between this network ID and broadcast ID. It will start from 30.1 to and end with 30.7. So to get the first host IP, we have to add the one IP address. That is the next IP address of our network ID. So we will get 30.1. The last host IP address is the previous IP address of our broadcast ID. So our broadcast ID is 30.7. So the previous IP address is 30.6. Here we can see our IP address range starts from 30.1 and ends with 30.6. Here we can see the total number of hosts we have calculated 6. The same way we have to calculate for the next subnet. To get the next subnet network ID, we have to add the block size 8 to the non-zero octet. In our case, non-zero octet is in the 4th octet. So we have to add this block size 8 in the 4th octet of our previous network ID. So we will get 30.8. So same way broadcast ID also we have to find out. We have to add the total number of IP addresses. So we will get 30.15. The first host IP address also, it is lies between the usable IP address lies between network ID and broadcast ID. The first host IP address is the next IP address of network ID. So 30.8 is our network ID. So next IP address is 30.9. So our last host IP address is previous IP address of our broadcast ID. So our broadcast ID is 30.15. So our previous IP address is 30.14. That is our last host IP address. The same way we have to find the network ID and broadcast ID and first host IP address, last host IP address for every subnet. So far we have seen how to do subnetting for Class C IP network.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel.